The letter from Lake Ridge Homeowners Association arrived on a frigid January morning, the same morning my auger finally broke through 16 inches of ice on Evergreen Lake. $500. That's what the board decided my winter tradition was worth in fines. I stared at the paper, the lake breeze cutting through my parka, and made a decision that would change everything in our quiet Minnesota community. I'm Ryan Anderson, and until that moment, I'd been a mild-mannered structural engineer who paid his dues on time and kept his lawn mowed to precisely 2.5 inches. But apparently, drilling a hole in a frozen lake to catch some walleye crossed some invisible line with our HOA president, Karen Westfield. Unsightly activities detrimental to community aesthetics, the violation notice read. I looked around the pristine white expanse where a dozen other ice houses dotted the lake, the same lake my grandfather had fished on 60 years ago, long before developers carved out the Lake Ridge community on its northern shore. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into my pocket, and finished setting up my portable ice house. Rules or not, I was catching dinner first, then I'd deal with Karen. The next morning, I marched into the HOA management office, violation notice in hand. Natalie Donahue, the only reasonable member of the board, looked up from her computer with sympathy. "Morning, Ryan. I'm guessing this is about the ice fishing notice." I placed the letter on her desk. "Since when is ice fishing against HOA regulations? The lake isn't even HOA property." Natalie sighed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I tried to tell them that at the meeting. The lake is county property with public access rights, but Karen convinced everyone that since our community's aesthetic value is tied to lake views, they could regulate activities visible from HOA properties." "That's ridiculous," I said. "People have been ice fishing on Evergreen Lake since before Lake Ridge existed." "I know. I voted against it, but I was outnumbered. Karen's been on a power trip since she became president last year." Just as Natalie finished speaking, the door to the inner office swung open, and Karen Westfield emerged, clipboard in hand. Pearls perfectly matched to her cream-colored sweater set. Her blonde hair was cut in that specific style that seemed required for women who made asking for managers their part-time job. "Mr. Anderson," she said coolly, "I see you've received our notice about your recreational violations. Ice fishing isn't a violation of anything, Karen. The lake isn't HOA property." Her smile tightened. "While the lake itself may not be under our direct jurisdiction, Lake Ridge Homeowners Association has a responsibility to maintain property values and community standards." Section 8. Paragraph 12 of our bylaws clearly states that no resident shall engage in activities that diminish the aesthetic quality or property values of the community. Ice fishing has been happening on that lake for 100 years. Not since Lake Ridge became a premier community with lakefront properties selling for over $1 million, she countered. The board has decided that ice fishing structures are unsightly and inconsistent with our community image. The fine stands. I could feel my blood pressure rising. "This is an overreach and you know it. Feel free to appeal at the next board meeting," Karen said dismissively. "Until then, I suggest you find another hobby that doesn't involve drilling holes in our picturesque winter landscape, perhaps indoor knitting." As she turned to leave, I called after her, "This isn't over." She didn't even look back. "The fine increases to $750 if not paid within 30 days, Mr. Anderson." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the violation notice beside me, and a growing stack of legal printouts. Public access laws, riparian rights, county records. I'd spent hours researching, and what I discovered made me both angry and thoughtful. Evergreen Lake wasn't just county property, it was technically owned by Northern Minnesota Land Holdings, LLC, a shell company for a development firm that had gone bankrupt in 2008. The county had management rights, but the actual deed had been sitting in limbo for years. I picked up my phone and called my college roommate, Thomas Erickson, who had gone on to become a real estate attorney in Minneapolis. "Tom, I need to know if it's possible to buy a lake." There was a pause on the other end. "That's not your typical how have you been opener, Ryan." I explained the situation, and by the end, Tom was laughing. "So let me get this straight, your HOA fined you for ice fishing, and your response is to try to buy the entire lake. Is it possible?" "Technically, yes. If this holding company still owns the deed, you could potentially make an offer. But we're talking serious money, and there would be environmental impact studies, public interest considerations." "But it's possible," Tom sighed. "Yes, it's possible. Send me everything you have and I'll look into it." For the next 3 weeks, I continued ice fishing, defiantly setting up my ice house in clear view of Karen's lakefront property, while accumulating more fines and working with Tom on what was starting to seem like a crazy plan. Then, just as February arrived with an even deeper freeze, Tom called with surprising news. "Ryan, you're not going to believe this. The holding company is desperate to unload this property. They've been carrying it on their books for years, and the environmental liabilities and tax issues have become a nightmare for them." My heart raced. "So what does that mean?" "It means they are willing to sell for pennies on the dollar, $215,000 for the entire 72-acre lake." I almost dropped the phone. "That's less than half the price of my house." "Exactly. But there's a catch: you'd be taking on certain environmental responsibilities and potential liabilities. Still want to pursue this?" I thought about Karen's smug face, about the generations of locals who had fished these waters, and about the absurdity of being told I couldn't enjoy a Minnesota tradition because it offended someone's delicate sensibilities. "Absolutely. Let's do this." The closing was remarkably quick. By Valentine's Day, I was the proud owner of Evergreen Lake. Tom had helped me establish Blue Ice Holdings, LLC, as the official owner to protect me from personal liability, and we'd navigated the minimal environmental requirements with relative ease. The lake was healthy, had no major issues, and the county was happy to continue its management agreement for public access with one key difference. I now had the right to establish certain usage rules. I waited until the next HOA board meeting to spring my surprise. As residents gathered in the community center to discuss spring landscaping requirements and the controversial new mailbox design Karen wanted to mandate, I signed up for the open comments period at the end. When my turn came, I walked to the front of the room with a folder of documents in hand. "Good evening, everyone. I'm here to address the recent HOA policy regarding ice fishing on Evergreen Lake." Karen straightened in her chair. "Mr. Anderson, we've already ruled on this matter." "Yes, you have. And that's why I'd like to inform the board and all residents of Lake Ridge that effective immediately, there are new regulations regarding winter access to Evergreen Lake." I distributed copies of a professionally printed notice to the board members and handed stacks to people in the front row to pass back. "What is this?" Karen demanded, scanning the document. "That is a notice from Blue Ice Holdings, LLC, the new owner of Evergreen Lake, regarding winter access policies." The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's face flushed red. "As the lake's owner," I continued once the noise died down, "I've established new rules for winter access. Ice fishing is explicitly permitted and encouraged as a traditional use of the lake. However, there is one restriction." I paused, making eye contact with Karen before continuing. "No access is permitted from any Lake Ridge HOA property without written permission from the lake owner. All other public access points remain open for everyone's use." Karen jumped to her feet. "This is preposterous. You can't own a lake." "Actually, I can and I do," I replied, sliding the deed and registration paperwork toward her. "You might want to review these documents. The HOA's properties end at the shoreline. Any docks or access points extending into the lake are now encroaching on private property." The room was dead silent as the implications sank in. The most expensive homes in Lake Ridge, including Karen's, were valuable precisely because of their lake access. Without it, their property values would take a significant hit. "This won't stand," Karen sputtered. "The board will challenge this immediately." Natalie Donahue, who had been reviewing the documents carefully, looked up. "Actually, Karen, it appears to be entirely legal. Mr. Anderson owns the lake bed and water rights." "Thank you, Miss Donahue," I said. "I should mention that I'm open to negotiating easements for lake access with the HOA under certain conditions." "What conditions?" Someone called from the back. "First, the immediate rescinding of all fines related to ice fishing or other traditional lake activities. Second, a modification of the HOA bylaws to explicitly recognize that the HOA has no jurisdiction over activities occurring on the lake itself. And third, a public apology from the board for overstepping its authority." Karen's face had turned from red to purple. "This is blackmail." "No, this is negotiation. You're welcome to maintain your current position, of course, in which case, no Lake Ridge resident will have direct lake access from their property this summer. I imagine that might affect property values more than a few ice houses in winter." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Homeowners were shouting at the board members, demanding they accept my terms. Karen was frantically whispering with the HOA's attorney. Natalie caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. I left them to sort it out among themselves, walking out into the cold February night with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The next day, my phone rang nonstop. Fellow homeowners, local news, even the county commissioner wanted to talk about the lake purchase. By evening, I had an email from the HOA's attorney requesting a formal meeting to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements regarding lake access rights. I agreed to meet the following week, giving them time to stew. In the meantime, I put up proper signage around the lake marking it as private property, with notices about the public access points that remained open for all community members, just not directly from Lake Ridge properties. On Saturday morning, I was drilling a new ice fishing hole when I noticed a figure trudging across the lake toward me. It was Michael Bennett, who lived 3 doors down from me and whose wife sat on the HOA board. "Morning, Ryan," he called as he approached. "Quite the stir you've caused." I nodded, continuing to work the auger. "Just protecting a tradition." Michael watched the ice chips fly. "For what it's worth, a lot of us think what you did was brilliant. Karen's been making life miserable for everyone since she took over." Seemed like the only language she'd understand. "The board's in panic mode. Property values are everything to them, and you've got them by the well, you know," he chuckled. "Karen tried to get everyone to agree to sue you, but the attorney told them you're on solid legal ground. They're going to cave to your demands." I finally broke through the ice, the cold water bubbling up around the auger. "Good to hear." "There's something else," Michael said, lowering his voice despite us being alone on the lake. "Some of us have been talking. The annual HOA board election is next month, and we need new leadership. Natalie Donahue is running for president. She could use support." I pulled the auger free and set it aside. "I'm listening." The formal meeting with the HOA took place in the community center the following Thursday. Karen arrived with the HOA attorney and 2 other board members, all looking grim. I brought Tom as my legal counsel and Natalie as an observer. The HOA's attorney, Jeffrey Perkins, opened the discussion. "Mr. Anderson, while we maintain that the HOA acted within its rights regarding community aesthetics, we recognize that the ownership of Evergreen Lake gives you certain leverage in this situation. I prefer to think of it as an opportunity to reset our relationship," I replied. "Indeed," Perkins said dryly. "To that end, the board is prepared to rescind all fines related to ice fishing activities and to amend the bylaws to clarify the HOA's jurisdictional boundaries." "And the public apology?" Karen's jaw tightened visibly, but Perkins continued smoothly. "The board will issue a community notice acknowledging the misunderstanding regarding lake regulations." "That's not an apology," Tom interjected. It's the best we can offer without admitting to legal wrongdoing, Perkins replied. I considered this for a moment. I'll accept the notice in lieu of a formal apology, provided it clearly states that the HOA exceeded its authority and that all lake activities are now regulated solely by Blue Ice Holdings and applicable county regulations. After some back and forth on the wording, we agreed on the text of the notice. Then we moved on to the question of lake access. We propose a blanket easement for all Lake Ridge properties with lake frontage, restoring the access rights they historically enjoyed, Perkins suggested. I shook my head. I'm offering individual easements to homeowners, not a blanket agreement with the HOA. That's unworkable, Karen finally spoke up. The HOA needs to maintain consistent rules across the community. The inconsistency was created by the HOA, I pointed out. I'm simply returning the decision-making power to individual homeowners where it belongs. After more heated discussion, we reached a compromise. I would grant a master easement to the HOA for lake access, but it would include strict limitations on the HOA's ability to regulate lake activities and would require a supermajority of 75% of homeowners to modify any lake-related rules in the future. As we wrapped up the meeting, Karen couldn't resist one parting shot. I hope you're satisfied with the disruption you've caused to our community, Mr. Anderson, I smiled politely. Actually, I think I've reminded everyone what community really means, Miss Westfield. It's not about uniform mailboxes or lawn height, it's about respecting traditions and treating your neighbors with decency. The documents were signed the following week. The fines were rescinded, the bylaws amended, and a carefully worded notice went out to all Lake Ridge residents explaining the new lake ownership and access arrangements. I granted the master easement to the HOA as agreed, ensuring that homeowners could continue to enjoy the lake from their properties. What Karen didn't know was that while all this was happening, a quiet campaign was building in the community. Michael Bennett and several other homeowners had been going door to door, talking about the upcoming board election and the need for new leadership. Natalie's candidacy for HOA president had gained significant support, especially after the lake incident demonstrated the problems with the current administration. On the first weekend of March, I hosted a community ice fishing event on Evergreen Lake. To my surprise, over 60 people showed up, including many who had never ice fished before. I provided equipment, bait, and hot chocolate, and several experienced fishermen offered lessons to newcomers. Karen did not attend, but I noticed her watching from her lakefront windows as families gathered on the ice, children squealing with delight when someone caught a fish, neighbors chatting and laughing in the winter sunshine. As the afternoon wore on, an elderly man approached me. He introduced himself as Harold Johnson, one of the original homeowners in Lake Ridge from 30 years ago. I used to ice fish here with my son before the HOA got so strict about everything, he said, watching as a young father helped his daughter reel in a small perch. Haven't been out here in years. Well, you're welcome anytime, I told him. Harold nodded thoughtfully. What you did buying the lake, that was quite something. Expensive way to make a point, I smiled. Sometimes standing up for what's right costs something. Indeed it does. He looked out across the lake. You know, when we first moved here, this was a real community. Neighbors helped each other, knew each other's names. Somewhere along the way that got lost in all the rules and property values. Maybe we can get some of that back, I suggested. Maybe we can, Harold agreed. I hear Natalie Donahue's running for board president. She got my vote. Mine too. Harold patted my shoulder. Keep up the good work, son. This lake's in better hands now. The HOA election took place 2 weeks later. The turnout was unprecedented. Nearly 87% of homeowners cast ballots, compared to the usual 30–40%. Natalie won the presidency by a landslide, and 3 other new members joined the board. Karen Westfield received only 18 votes out of nearly 300 cast. After the results were announced, Natalie found me at the back of the room. "Congratulations, Madam President," I said, shaking her hand. "Couldn't have done it without your lake purchase lighting a fire under everyone," she replied. "First order of business is a complete review of all the ridiculous fines and violations from the past year. Sounds like a good start. And we'd like to discuss something else with you," she continued. The new board was wondering if you'd consider a partnership with the HOA regarding the lake. Not ownership, but maybe a joint conservation committee to ensure it stays healthy and accessible for generations to come. "I'd be open to that," I said. "That was always the goal, protecting the lake and its traditions." "Great, we'll talk details later." Natalie glanced across the room to where Karen was gathering her things, pointedly ignored by her former supporters. "Kind of feel bad for her." "Don't," I replied. "She'll be fine." People who need to control everything always find something new to fixate on. As spring arrived and the ice melted, revealing the deep blue waters of Evergreen Lake once again, life in Lake Ridge settled into a new normal. The Joint Conservation Committee was established, with representatives from the HOA, longtime fishing enthusiasts, and environmental experts working together to develop sustainable policies for lake use. Karen Westfield put her house on the market in April and moved to a golf community in Arizona by June. The new owners of her property, a young couple with 3 children, immediately installed a dock and bought a canoe. One evening in early summer, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. Natalie stopped by with a bottle of wine to celebrate the 6-month anniversary of what the community now jokingly called the Great Lake Rebellion. "The lawyers finished the last of the paperwork today," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "The easements are all properly recorded, the Conservation Committee is officially recognized by the county, and the HOA bylaws have been completely overhauled. To progress," I said, raising my glass. "And to pettiness transformed into something worthwhile," she added with a smile. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a pair of loons glide across the water. "You know," Natalie said eventually, "when you first bought the lake, some people thought you were just being vindictive. And now they understand you were protecting something important." She turned to look at me. "This place feels like a community again. People are outside, talking to each other, sharing the lake. There was a fishing derby last weekend. Did you see it?" I nodded. "Harold Johnson won the senior division. He told me he hadn't fished in 10 years before you hosted that ice fishing event." I smiled, remembering Harold's words to me on the ice. "Sometimes standing up for what's right costs something, but it's worth it." "Well, cheers to that," Natalie said, touching her glass to mine. "And to proving that one determined ice fisherman can outmaneuver even the most controlling HOA president Minnesota has ever seen." As the summer progressed, my relationship with Natalie evolved beyond HOA business and lake conservation. We began dating in July, much to the delight of the community gossips, who had apparently been placing bets on when it would happen since the March ice fishing event. By fall, the transformation of Lake Ridge was remarkable. The community newsletter, once filled with violation notices and rule reminders, now featured stories about neighborhood achievements, volunteer opportunities, and upcoming social events. The annual Labor Day picnic drew record attendance, with families gathering at the lake for swimming, fishing, and a community potluck. Karen Westfield's legacy hadn't completely disappeared, though. The HOA still maintained standards for home maintenance and basic aesthetics, but the approach was collaborative rather than punitive. When issues arose, the first step was a friendly conversation, not an impersonal violation notice with a fine attached. In October, I received a surprising letter, not a violation notice this time, but a community recognition award from the Lake Ridge HOA, acknowledging my significant contribution to preserving natural resources and community traditions. It was signed by all 7 board members and included an invitation to be the guest of honor at the Fall Harvest Festival. As I showed the letter to Natalie over dinner that evening, she smiled mysteriously. "You knew about this, didn't you?" I asked. "I may have recused myself from the vote," she admitted, "but it was Michael Bennett's idea, actually. He said you reminded everyone what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it seems extreme at first." Buying a lake was definitely extreme, I acknowledged. My financial advisor still gives me grief about it, but worth it. I thought about everything that had happened since that January morning when I received the first fine notice the community that had rediscovered itself. The traditions preserved, the friendships formed, and the woman sitting across from me now. "Absolutely worth it," I said. "Best investment I ever made." Winter returned to Minnesota with its usual vengeance, and on the first weekend that the ice was safely thick, I organized the first annual Evergreen Lake ice fishing tournament. More than 100 people participated, including visitors from neighboring communities who had heard about Lake Ridge's famous lake owner. Standing on the ice that December morning, watching families set up their ice houses and children learning to use fishing gear, I felt a deep satisfaction that went far beyond winning a battle with an overzealous HOA president. Harold Johnson joined me, now serving as the tournament's honorary judge. "Look at this," he said, gesturing at the activity across the frozen lake. "Haven't seen anything like it in decades." "It's how it should be," I replied. "You know what the best part is?" Harold asked. "What's that?" "The story," he chuckled. "Every newcomer to Lake Ridge gets told the tale of how Ryan Anderson got fined for ice fishing and responded by buying the whole damn lake. It's become local legend. They'll be telling it 50 years from now." I laughed. "Hopefully with some exaggerations to make me seem more heroic." "Oh, no doubt," Harold agreed. "By then, Karen will have evolved into a fire-breathing dragon, and you'll have slain her with an ice auger while riding a moose across the lake." Later that evening, as participants gathered in the community center for the awards ceremony and hot cocoa, Natalie took the microphone to make an announcement. "Before we present the fishing awards, I want to share some exciting news," she began. "The county has officially recognized our lake conservation model as exemplary, and they've invited us to help develop similar community-based approaches for other lakes in the region." Applause filled the room. "Furthermore," she continued, "Blue Ice Holdings, which we all know is Ryan's company, has established a trust to ensure that Evergreen Lake will remain protected and accessible to the community in perpetuity, regardless of who owns lakefront property or who serves on the HOA board." All eyes turned to me, and I felt a moment of embarrassment at the attention. I hadn't planned to announce the trust yet, but Natalie had convinced me that the community deserved to know that their lake access was secure for the long term. As the applause died down, Michael Bennett raised his mug of cocoa. "To Ryan Anderson, the man who taught us all that sometimes you have to buy a lake to preserve a community." Laughter and cheers echoed through the room, and I couldn't help but smile as I thought about how differently things might have turned out if Karen Westfield hadn't decided to fine me for ice fishing that January morning. A year after the initial confrontation, Lake Ridge had been transformed. Property values had actually increased, not because of strict rules and conformity, but because the community had become known as a place where neighbors looked out for each other, and natural resources were valued and protected. The lake that had once been a source of conflict was now the heart of the community, bringing people together across generations. The ice fishing tradition that Karen had tried to eliminate had become a celebrated community event. As for me, I never regretted buying Evergreen Lake, even though it hadn't been the most financially prudent decision of my life. Some things are worth more than money, like tradition, community, and standing up for what's right. And sometimes, the most powerful response to pettiness and control isn't anger or compliance, but creative problem solving that transforms the entire situation. In the end, I didn't just preserve the right to ice fish. I helped restore a community's soul, and in the process, found a deeper connection to this place I called home. And every winter, when the lake freezes over and the ice houses appear on its surface, I remember that sometimes the best way to fight for tradition isn't with angry words or bitter lawsuits, but with bold action and a willingness to invest in what truly matters. Natalie joined me on the ice for the final award presentation, squeezing my hand as I handed out the trophy for the biggest fish, a respectable northern pike caught by a 12-year-old girl who had never been ice fishing before this winter. "You know," Natalie whispered as the crowd cheered for the young winner, "most people just file an appeal when they get an unfair fine." I grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" And as the winter sun set over Evergreen Lake, casting long shadows across the ice where generations past and generations to come would continue the tradition of ice fishing, I knew I'd made exactly the right choice. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when they're about more than just rules, when they're about preserving the connections that make a community truly home.